Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I have a very interesting conversation today with Siobhan Chirico. She is a registered psychotherapist. She specializes in helping children and families. She works in a private practice and teaches self-regulated learning at the Faculty of Education at Wilfrid Laurier University. And she's just published a guided picture book for parents, caregivers, and educators. The book aims to offer specific things to think, do, and say to create and maintain a peaceful space, even in challenging situations. And we all know we all run into some very challenging situations. Siobhan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. It's good to be here.
Great to have you. So tell me, what brought you to where you are in writing this book about think, do, and say?
Yeah, it's been an interesting winding road to kind of get to here. So I started off actually as a teacher in special education, and I worked in the Halton area, and I moved into a portfolio all around kids who have challenging behavior. So helping teachers and schools and principals and families with kids who are exhibiting lots of challenging behavior, some big stuff. So I got so many opportunities to do some great learning there. I got to study at Massachusetts General Hospital with Think Kids. They have a very specific program around helping kids with challenging behavior. And I loved that work so much. So much that I wanted to learn a little bit more. And I felt a little constrained in the school system because you only get so much time with kids and teachers to do the work. So I left that to pursue a master's degree in psychotherapy so that I could do more work with kids and families in a more concentrated way. So the book, in a roundabout way, came from both of those places. It started off as a resource for the parents and kids that I work with now in private practice. And I found that I continued to send similar things to different families. So I'm making little booklets here, little booklets there, little slide decks here,
So might
little
as well
slide
write a
decks
book.
there. Yeah. So then I just started compiling them all.
So,
And yeah,
so can you take a step back? I apologize, but take a step back.
sure.
What's a challenging behavior? Like, we've heard about ADHD, we've heard about, lots of different issues that people have that would be a diagnosis. But a challenging behavior is just a tough kid or a bad kid or something like that, right?
Yeah. So in my work, the diagnosis is a little bit less important than what the behavior is trying to tell us. So a challenging behavior might look like, screaming, yelling, throwing, crying, hurting someone else, hurting yourself. It might also look a little quieter, like withdrawing, leaving a space, kind of hanging out in your room all the time and not really wanting to interact with people. So for parents, it's kind of critical to watch what your child's kind of behavior is. And for me, from my perspective, it doesn't matter. It's all behavior. It's telling us something. So I'm looking for what is behind the behavior that we need to uncover to help this kiddo out.
How do you do that?
So in the book, I've kind of broken it down into think, do, say, like you mentioned, Brian. So the first part is the think, and that part is for parents or educators or whoever the grown up in the situation is. So it's really that first step to kind of regulating us as the adult in the room, because when the challenge behavior comes, and I think as parents, we've probably all experienced this, the screaming, the yelling, the throwing, the I hate yous, the door slammings, whatever. As soon as it starts happening, we get a little upset too, right? Like we start to feel frustrated or out of control too. So the first part about the thinking is we got to ground ourselves as the adult in the situation to say, okay, what's going on here? What is this kid trying to tell me? Instead of why is this kid acting this way? Is it just to drive me crazy? Because it's usually not. It's usually because there's something else going on.
I always sort of assumed it was just a desire for attention. It was a way of getting attention.
And that's a thought. And then I would just go one step further back and say, but why? Why do they need attention? What kind of attention's missing? That they feel that they have to achieve it in this way, right? It's true that we all like attention. So is there a lack of attention? Is there something we're missing?
How do you figure that out? By thinking.
And maybe just assuming that there's something going on. So maybe it's attention. Maybe something's really hard that you've asked them to do and they really don't know how to do it. Maybe something else has gone on in their day and you don't really understand why that they came in and, threw their iPad at you because, the kid on the playground earlier said something terrible to them. So how do we figure it out? We just kind of have to get curious and start listening and keep ourselves in that moment so where we can maintain our own composure to allow for that curiosity, really.
Okay. And so then when you figured it out, what do you do?
Well, that's a good question. So when you figured it out, then you can start working on solving a problem together. So the hardest part is kind of figuring out what is the problem, and you work with your child to figure out what is the problem, and then you continue to work with them to solve the problem, whatever it might be.
So this is a
And this is
common problem, not just their problem.
probably, right? It's probably a problem, either a problem they're having in the moment, it could be an ongoing problem that happens all the time. But if you don't understand what it is, then you can't really start to help them solve it. The
Okay.
other big thing we do as parents right now, and I do notice this a lot, is we solve the problem for our kids. And it's really great if we can spend a little bit more time and get the kids to be really involved in how to solve their own problems.
Say that again. That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah. So if they're having a problem, helping them work through those steps to figure out what is your problem, and then taking a little bit more time to help them figure out how they might solve their problem instead of jumping in and solving for them.
Someone told me that that was a really good lesson for relationships as well.
It's true. And anecdotally, there's a little gendered piece there, right? Often we find that if a woman kind of says, "I'm having this problem," the man often likes to jump in and try
This
and
is how
solve
you
for.
solve it. Come on, I
Yeah,
know how to
just
do
do
it.
this and you'll feel better. And yeah, sometimes you just want someone to say, "Oh, I hear you. That sounds really hard. Oh my gosh."
And then do is the last one. So we think and we've done and so then you got to say.
Yeah, so in the book, I try to give some specific uh specific words for parents to say. So something like, "Oh, something seems really hard for you right now. I wonder what's going on. Do you have any ideas about how you're feeling right now?" It's really to allow kids some space to actually think about what is wrong before we jump in as the grown-ups, to tell them what's wrong and then to start solving for them. So the book has very specific little lines for you. It's just you're safe, you're okay. Like if they're in a crisis, they're all screaming, there, it's really bad. Some things that you can say instead of calm down, because in the history of the world, telling someone to calm down has never helped them to calm down.
Oh, come
So
on,
there's
calm down.
there's a couple phrases in there. And the other piece where that comes in really nicely is, I work with lots of families that are working through separation and divorce. And so there's co-parenting involved, right? So one parent uses this phrase, another parent uses this phrase, or even if there's not separation, even there's just, um, parents on different pages. So having a little resource like this where you can kind of agree, okay, we like this phrase and this phrase and this phrase, we're going to kind of commit to using those so the child then can have predictability. So especially when things are hard, we like predictability.
Sounds like a great book and very helpful. It's called Think, Do, Say.
It's called Climbing Crisis Mountain, and a guided picture book for managing meltdowns and tantrums.
Oh, I had the name wrong. I apologize. Say it
That's
again.
okay.
Climbing Crisis Mountain.
Yes. Um, and that comes from just a visual around what actually some child client shared with me and how it feels for him when he is moving into a place where it's really hard. So a mountain, you can imagine, at the bottom there's grass and everything's fine, and then it goes up. And then as you get to the top, it's a volcano. That's the really, really hard part. But then you've also got to come down the other side. So once we've had a child kind of experience the worst part of a crisis and be a big emotional kind of outburst, we got to take them back down too. We can't just expect them to be okay after that, right? So
Climbing
that's kind of the visual.
Crisis Mountain. Sounds like a great title. Where can one get it?
Everywhere you buy books, Indigo, Amazon. It's going to be in some of the Toronto stores in hard copy in the Indigo stores, but also, of course, online anywhere you buy books.
Sounds like a great, very helpful book. Maybe you'd read something from it for us. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with Siobhan Chirico?
Chirico.
Chirico.
Yeah.
In just 2 minutes, talking about kids that are having big problems, challenging problems. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight about about helping kids that are challenging kids. Our guest is Siobhan Chirico. She's a registered psychotherapist. Sounds like she's got an interesting story. We might try to get into it a little bit more. She started out as a teacher and then decided to do a master's in psychotherapy and focus on challenging children. And so much so that she's written this guided picture book for parents, caregivers, and educators. And it's called Climbing Crisis Mountain. Sounds like it's a great title for what probably a lot of people go through at times. And I know that, that feeling when you're in a crisis or you feel it coming on. And my mom used to say, just, take 10 seconds and breathe and stop and relax. So you probably got some good suggestions on how to do that. But Siobhan, there's got to be something more here. Tell me, you were a teacher. You went to Massachusetts to the sick kids there, and you got motivated, decided to do a master's. Was there an incident, a story, a occasion, a relationship, or something rather that sort of changed your path?
Yeah, there definitely was. So I was no longer teaching in the classroom, and I was kind of in a consultant role in special education, and my portfolio was challenging behavior. So I remember being in a school, trying to set up a program to help a child who was really struggling, and you do get to meet the family that way. You get to have some nice conferences with moms and dads and teachers, and I had some great educational assistants that were helping, and there was so much work to do. And I just was in the middle of it thinking, I just wish I could spend more time with this kid and this family, because in the school system, that's not often available, to spend time with the family, to really dig in a little deeper and really be able to train the family in some strategies that would just help them every day. And you can do that there. So I thought if I could work in private practice, that's what I could do.
And so tell me about your experience in Boston.
So, Think Kids is run out of the Department of Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital, and Dr. Stuart Ablon is the head over there. And he's spent years researching and studying challenging behavior in kids and how we can help them. Actually, his work has now grown so much it's into the corporate world and into other worlds, because the strategies they're pretty universal, even though we start off thinking about kids. Um, Lots of these strategies I use all the time with my husband, with my colleagues, with lots of folks,
Don't tell
because
me
it's a lot about.
don't tell me your husband is challenging.
I think all husbands are challenging, but just helps ground us, right? And what's going on, and keep our own emotions in check. That's really the thing.
And the idea for the book, where'd that come from? Why did you go from just helping people in private practice to deciding to write a picture book, nevertheless?
Well, there's so many families out there that are looking for some help, and I understand that being able to come to a private psychotherapist is an expensive endeavor, and it's a time-consuming endeavor, and it's just not accessible to everyone. So as I was noticing patterns in the families that I was working with, I was compiling the information that seemed to be the most helpful, and it got me thinking, well, would I be able to get this information out to other families in a much more financially accessible way, right? And even a time appropriate way. Um, and that's really the where it all started and where it all came from. So the idea is really just this book could help people, and it's like a $25 commitment instead of hours and hours in the therapy room with the price tag that goes along with that. So that was kind of the intention.
You talk about creating and maintaining a peaceful space, even when things get challenging. I think that's what people find the most difficult. I have someone who I know who, very successful person, but gets triggered and constantly uses this word, getting triggered. And when they get triggered, they're almost uncontrollable. It's like something's taken over their body, their psyche, their mind, their everything, and they are uncontrollable. So impossible to keep a peaceful space.
Yeah, so the first step there might be helping that person kind of notice when it's starting. When that big feeling of uncontrol is about to start, like where do they notice that in their body? And even I would take a step back further and say, are you ready for it to feel a little different? We kind of we need to be a little bit ready to say, actually, what's happening right now is not working anymore. So I might need to try something different. So feeling out of control is not pleasant. So I can imagine that that person would be interested in maybe making some changes there. So the first step is starting to notice it and maybe naming it. And I talk about this in the book. Lots of us get stuck with like, I'm happy, I'm sad, or I'm mad. And if you label something that way, your brain interprets it that way. So maybe you're actually feeling disappointed, but you call it mad. Well, your behavior is going to relate to mad, not disappointed. If you are able to say, "Oh, I feel disappointed," it conjures different behavior and different language from us. Or I feel frustrated. Then you kind of figure, well, why do I feel frustrated?
And then I have another friend. This person seems to always get triggered, and it's an immediate thing, and so it comes and it goes. And then someone else, it's they harbor their problems forever for a long time. So it's like a slow burn. So one is a quick forest fire, crisis mountain, and then
Yeah.
the other person, it's like it's a long forever problem that's 2 years old, 3 years old.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me too, Brian. So when I think about that analogy of the crisis mountain, so it sounds like one of your friends just jumps up, he's climbed right to the top real fast, and the other one is probably sitting at, in a peak somewhere in the yellow to red zone, and they probably never come down to that nice green grass where they'd actually ever feel calm. So it's possible that they're living in a state of chronic stress and chronic, like, so they're always on the edge of a crisis, it sounds like. So starting to recognize that in ourselves is usually the first step to say, oh my gosh, I don't even remember what it feels like to not feel this level of stress. And there's some biology there too, right? Like if you're in stress, you have cortisol running through your body, which is a hormone, you have adrenaline running through your body. And sometimes when we live at near the peak of crisis mountain for a long time, we actually get addicted to that. Our body gets addicted to the cortisol running through all the time. So
We
it
get
starts with,
addicted to stress. We like it.
yeah, well, we get used to it and we like things that we're used to. We like, as humans, we like things that we're used to, even when they're not good for us, because we like certainty better than everything.
Really, that's interesting. Can you say that again? We like
We get,
things that we get used to.
yeah, so we like certainty. So sometimes we continue in behaviors that no longer are helpful because we know what they are and we can predict them. And that is our brain tricking us a little bit into staying in maybe habits that no longer serve us.
How do you get out of that?
Awareness. So you have to start noticing and you have to start thinking about, oh my gosh, I just feel stressed all the time. And so much so that I don't know what it feels like. Then sometimes I would help clients like take them back a little bit to say, well, can you remember a time when you didn't feel like this, when you felt more like yourself or you felt like you had some control in the world? And then what was going on then versus what's going on now? Then you start, figuring out what those, as you said, triggers are. Like, what is it that sparks the big emotion for you?
So
So
I've talked about someone that's got this trigger and an immediate issue, and someone else that's sort of. I think that the way you've described it about sort of what was it, chronic stress,
stress, yeah.
is another. Are there other sort of traits of people in challenging situations that you've noticed?
Yeah, it can often be some skills that they're lagging, right? So if you can imagine if you've been asked to do something and you don't have the skills to do it, that brings up some big emotional content for you. So just you can use even learning as an analogy. So if you asked a child, say, please here, read this book out loud to me, and the child really doesn't know how to read, and you keep insisting, no, you have to read this book. If you read it, I'll give you a chocolate bar, I'll give you more screen time. Like, can you imagine if you're being asked to do something you really don't know how to do it, and then if you do this, I'll give you something. If you don't do it, now you're getting recess taken away. Now you're getting this taken away. But you don't know how to do it. So it doesn't matter what people are offering or taking away because you don't have the skill for it. So that can lead to lots of emotions.
So what do you do when that person just give up in teaching them how to read? That doesn't sound like
No, you definitely teach them how to read. So what we're doing in that case is we're questioning someone's motivation. So when we're saying, read this book, and they haven't learned how to read that level of a book yet, you say, just try and I'll give you this, but they really can't do it. that's the grown up in the situation now saying, oh, well, maybe I've chosen something that is out of their reach. They don't have the skills yet. So I got to go back a little bit, figure out what do they know and what's the next thing in line for them to learn. And with emotional intelligence, it's really the same thing. Some people and kids haven't learned maybe how to communicate very effectively. So they don't know how to say to someone, I need help. So instead, it looks like maybe even your friend, right? Losing control, but maybe what they really need to say is, I need help. There's too much on my plate. But they don't know how. They've not practiced that.
This sounds fascinating and very helpful. Can you read something from your book for us by any chance to give us a sense of what we would benefit from if we had the opportunity to buy the book and read it?
Sure. I'll just read a little bit about. I've in the book kind of color coded things. It's really meant to be a bit of a reference guide that you could pick up when your child is maybe at the top of that crisis, and I call that area red. So that's the top of the volcano when things are happening. So red is hard for kids. Kids describe being on top of Crisis Mountain as terrible. They do not want to be there. Kids often talk about how hard it is to get out of red because they feel ashamed, embarrassed, angry, and scared about their own behaviors. They don't know how to get down safely. They worry about the punishments that will follow, about looking silly, and about what people will think and say. They worry that they will be asked to talk about their behaviors, and they know they're not ready to have those conversations. This panicky, unsettled feeling can keep kids stuck on top of Crisis Mountain for longer, sometimes until they fall asleep because they're so exhausted. And they might still be there when they wake up too. And red is hard for adults too. Adults describe watching their child on top of Crisis Mountain as terrible. They do not want to be there, especially if it happens in the middle of a crowd or they get that phone call from school. You know the one. Please come and pick up your child. They're not doing well. Adults describe the top of Crisis Mountain as feeling out of control, judged, anxious, and overwhelmed. And the good news is you have some control because your reaction will determine the duration and the intensity of the current crisis and a future crisis. So the idea here is that I really want parents to be able to have some compassion for themselves and for their kids. This stuff is hard. It's hard for everyone. No one is working with a child who is struggling and thinking, oh, I got this. It's super easy. It's not, right? So it's hard for the kids and it's hard for the adults. And, you know, some of the parents I work with, by the time they get to me, they're so exhausted. They've been living this turmoil for so long that they're tired. And, you know, giving parents a little bit of permission to say, there's no way you should know how to do all these things. It's okay. And then working on some strategies together, it's like such relief.
I've had two experiences maybe 2 months ago, a couple months ago. And it was interesting because I think it was on, if not the same weekend, it might have been the same week, but I was in a restaurant, two different restaurants. And in one, there was a kid having a temper tantrum and the parent reacted by yelling and screaming to try to calm the kid down, or control or discipline or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone, I don't know, everyone felt sorry for the kid because the parent was reacting almost in as much velocity. I don't know what the right word is, to calm down and discipline the kid as the kid was in the temper tantrum. And then in another situation, the kid was having a different kid was having a temper tantrum, and both of them were sort of not infants but not teenagers. And the parent just sat there and ignored and kept on eating, and everyone felt like terrible again for the parent. Like, what the heck are you
Yeah.
doing? Discipline your kid, control your kid.
Yeah. I think
No,
as
it's not
parents,
like there's no way you can.
there's constant judgment no matter what you do, right? So there's constant judgment. Yeah. And you're right, Brian. Like in that situation, what you observed is, you know, you said the kid having the tantrum and then the parent gets emotionally charged immediately with them, right? So you're kind of like going up, up, up together, parent and kid, going up together. So in the book, there's an explanation of something called co-regulation. So that looks like when one person's going up, the other person stays here. If you can maintain some composure, take a deep breath, what will happen is the other person comes back down. So if you both get emotionally charged, you're going to go up. If one person gets emotionally charged and the other can maintain some calm and composure, the temperature will settle down.
Will it? I was in another situation again, not with a kid, but with a relationship where someone got mad and got triggered or whatever, not triggered, different person. But then yelled at me. Well, God, blah blah blah. React, get mad,
So,
respond.
yeah, I hear that too. And go back to your other scenario where the parent will ignore the child, right? So ignoring is not really helpful either because that's kind of it's kind of the same thing as yelling because something's going on with the kid and they do need some attention. They're trying to tell you something. So maybe in this situation too where somebody wants a reaction, uh it can be like, hey, something looks like it's going on for you right now. How can I be helpful?
That wouldn't
But
have gone over well. How could I
I
be?
know, and it's true that it goes back to what I said before. Sometimes you get really addicted to being in those crisis moments and being in a state of stress. So you're looking for it. And the the strategies that I'm talking about in the book and just here too are kind of something you need to practice. It's like learning to play basketball. You don't pick up the ball the first time and start shooting all the hoops, right? So you practice these strategies with your children or maybe your partner, whoever you're talking about, Ryan. And then eventually things start to change. So they start to be able to predict, okay, now I know when this happens, mom or dad or whoever is going to react this way. And I know that they're going to be the calm in the storm. They're going to help me through this. I can get my problem solved together. So when children start to expect that, the crisis eventually they don't happen so much at all.
They don't have to climb Crisis Mountain.
They don't have to get that attention in that big way, right? They know they can get what they need in a new way.
Siobhan, remind us the name of the book, please.
Climbing Crisis Mountain, and it's a guided picture book for parents dealing with, or for sorry, I don't even know my name of my own book. A guided picture book for managing meltdowns and tantrums.
Meltdowns and Tantrums. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with Siobhan. Chat a little bit more because this sounds like it's really helpful, not just for kids and parents, but frankly for everyone. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. My guest tonight is Siobhan
Chirico.
Chirico.
It's okay.
Siobhan Chirico. I never figured out the spelling of Siobhan. It should be like Siobhan, not Siobhan. Like it's the pronunciation of your first name is the more challenging one, but that's the last name that I've been having struggles with. I apologize. A child psychologist who's written a picture book about climbing Crisis Mountain. Why a picture book, Siobhan?
Well, in my work, I usually start with the children, right? So in my private practice as a psychotherapist, parent calls me up and says, we're having all this trouble with our child. We don't know what to do anymore. So can we bring the child in? So that's great. Bring the child in, start working with the child. Inevitably, I need to work with parents too, though, right? Because whatever's going on with the child is something that parents are going to need to be involved in the solutions for that, right? I find that I usually get one parent who's able to come in because there's lots of time constraints and lots of things going on in the world. And often both parents can't commit to coming in once a week to the therapist's office. So then I'm trying to explain to one parent, here's a strategy. And then it becomes their job to take that home and explain it to the other parent and try and do this work together. And at the same time, they're living in a stress-filled house because they have this child with all these challenging behaviors, right? They don't have time to read a long textbook. They don't want to. So I created a picture book to make it a little bit easier for the adults to be able to just say, summarize, just tell us what we need to say, what we need to do. We don't need to know all of the text behind what's going on here. And then it's also color coded so that you can pick it up. And if you feel like, oh, my child's just starting to climb up Crisis Mountain, they're in the yellow stage where I can feel crisis is coming, but it's not here yet. You can turn to the yellow section of the book and you'll have the words and the actions that you can do to kind of de-escalate the situation and come back down. The other piece is, I mentioned before, I worked in special education before this. So I'm really in tune with how different people access information, like neurodiversity and different ways of learning. And lots of people like to have a picture. It really helps solidify the information, right? So even as adults, maybe that's just an easier and more accessible way to remember something That's important.
How'd you find the illustrator? Or did you illustrate?
I did not. I wish I had that talent, but I do not. No, the illustrator was the publisher actually found an illustrator for me. So we worked together that way.
How long did it take to write the book?
Ooh, um, 10 years, but maybe like really eight months, right? It was an interesting project to get to work with the illustrator, and I had some ideas, but I have no talent in any kind of visual art. So, um, yeah, the text took a little while, but like I said, I've been kind of gathering it from private practice and my work at the university too. I have all these nice slide decks where I'm teaching teacher candidates about kind of this stuff. So it did come together
You're
quite
teaching
organically.
teachers how to deal with problem situations.
That's right. So the teacher candidates that are going on to become teachers, yeah, it was actually the last course that everyone had to take. It was a mandatory course about self-regulated learning. So it's about this stuff. It's about how do we co-regulate, how do we manage challenging behavior in a classroom when there's 30 other kids and there's all this stuff going on, because that's hard stuff, right? Um, yep. So the strategies are applicable at home and at school and in the restaurant when the kid has a tantrum.
It's really applicable in life. And so as you've been talking, I've been thinking about a whole bunch of situations that I'm either, involved in or aware of or whatnot, and how some of your techniques could really help. And just this morning, I read a couple of articles in the newspaper about dealing with Donald Trump. And it was almost as if they were not analyzing the issues and how to address the issues. They were analyzing the individual and how to address a challenging individual. And as you're talking, I'm almost thinking, I wonder how you would deal with a person differently if if you thought they were a challenging adult.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I've encountered quite a few challenging adults too in my life, right? And we all become the challenging adult sometimes too. If you're in the situation that is stressful for you or makes your emotions run high, then you're the challenging adult. So that co-regulation technique, where if you can stay grounded in a hard situation, the other big piece is we get defensive as humans. It's pretty natural, right? To get defensive if someone says something that's a little hot or a little pointed, you go instantly to defensive instead of thinking, what's up with that person? Why would they say that? Like making it about the person who said it instead about yourself as you receive that comment. So I definitely don't want to comment on Donald Trump in particular, but I've been reading those same articles and I agree, Brian, that there's definitely some curiosity about psychology going on there about how do you deal with a person because he operates differently than what we're used to in that kind of political sphere, right? And there's a script for how we interact with people and when it's upended, we have to give it some thought.
So some people would, use the word bully. And so let's turn off of him and onto sort of the typical schoolyard bully. How do you deal with a bully?
A bully is probably the same for me. They're exhibiting challenging behavior. Certainly, they might be hurting someone else. We have to deal with that stuff immediately to make sure everyone's safe. But I would have some compassion for the bully because something's going on there. Like if you're bullying other people and that's the way you're interacting with the world, something's going on. So maybe you're missing some skills. Maybe you're having a hard time. Maybe your home life is really in a bad place. Like there's something going on if that's what you're doing to get attention. It's back to what you said at the beginning, Brian. Like some kids are just maybe looking for attention, and that might be true, but why? What's going on? Where are you missing attention? Why do you feel like you're not seen or not heard right now and you're lashing out this way? So I would work with the bully.
Do you have children of your own?
I do, yeah.
How do they feel dealing with mom who's like so smart about how to deal with kids? Or your
Um,
husband? How does your husband feel about dealing with you when you're so smart and experienced and capable in these areas? Do they start saying, "Don't bring your don't do the stuff from the book with me"?
they do say that. But they also they use it now. They kind of use it sometimes even against me. I would note if they saw that I was getting a little hot, they say, Mom, I'm just gonna co-regulate you right now. So I'll be the calm person in this conversation if you're having a hard time. And actually, my husband and I are away right now, and we had a very challenging airport adventure, and it was really funny. We went to the wrong airport. Everyone in Toronto knows that Porter flies out of Billy Bishop. We were on a Porter flight. We thought we were going on a Billy Bishop. We got there. We're trying to check in, and they're like, "Yeah, you guys are at Pearson." So we are he's losing it because now we got to get back over to Pearson and hopefully make this flight. And I stay super calm and I just smiled. I said, you know what? I think we have time. I think we're going to make it. And we get on the plane. He's like, you did that co-regulation crap with me, didn't you? I said, yes, I did. And it was really hard for me. I was upset too. But it was funny.
Who was supposed to read the terminal?
I know. He was. He was. So that's what he knew. He knew he was toasted. He was like, it was totally me. I bought the tickets. I had the boarding passes on my phone. I'm the one who didn't check. He couldn't even throw any of it to me. So he knew. But yeah, it was pretty funny.
So explain what is, because it sounds like it's really helpful, particularly if it's thrown in your face. What is co-regulation?
So that is when one person kind of uses their emotions, because emotions are contagious. This is something that is helpful to understand, that emotions are contagious. So if one person is having a big frustrated emotion and, dropping an F-bomb in the middle of, say, Billy Bishop Airport, and then the other person is able to just say, okay, you know what? It looks like we might have time to get over there and still catch your flight, and it's probably going to be fine. The goal is that my emotion would be contagious to him in this direction. But if the person, is very frustrated and screaming, and then the other person also gets really frustrated and says, well, this is all your fault. You were the one who was supposed to check. Now that's been contagious, right? So now we've both got that, and it's just not helpful. So co-regulation is about sharing your calm.
Sharing your calm.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my mom always used to talk about the 10-second and the deep breaths, which is sort of like what you described of the not ignore, but sort of just not confront. Is that helpful or not helpful?
Yeah, that is helpful. Like the pause is always helpful, right? And that's a big part of everything that we know about like modifying behavior and changing behavior kind of starts with that pause. If you can pause between the moment you feel the big feeling and the moment you do something about the big feeling, you're gonna do better. So that pause in between is very critical. So your mom's absolutely right. If you can pause and if you can breathe, some people like to close their eyes. Some people like to kind of tap their fingers together to get out of their head a little bit and back into feeling their body. There's different strategies that you can use, but the pause is definitely.
What's the tap the fingers? What does that do?
So when you just kind of put your thumb to your finger and you kind of squeeze, it just reminds you that you are here in the present moment. It takes you out of worrying what's going to happen or being anxious about what already happened. It brings you back to just right here in this moment. Can you pause? So just doing anything, you could scrunch your big toe. It's like just noticing your body and then staying in it instead of going in your head and wandering. We usually wander to the past or the future. If we can just stay right here for a minute and breathe or whatever we need to do.
That's interesting. I'm not sure if you're a football fan, but if you've been watching Patrick Mahomes, the quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs, he plays with his fingers in between plays, and people have said that that's a way of him calming down and focusing on the next play, not worrying about the last play. And up until this conversation, I never thought that made sense, but now it seems like you think that it actually makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I do it, and it does make sense to me. It just brings me back to this moment. Because that's, anxiety is usually worrying about something that's going to happen or something that already happened and you can't change. So in sports, it's very easy to get distracted by, are we going to win? Are we not going to win? Instead of what's the play we're playing right now? So that's all you can control.
So taking a pause, deep breaths, counting to 10, playing with your fingers. Any other good suggestions for how to control your emotions?
Sure, especially if you're dealing with kids, but also grown-ups. There can be things like just getting the big emotion from kind of inside your body to out is really helpful. So for kids, it might be giving them some paper, just to like rip and rip and rip because it helps get the emotion out. Punching a pillow, because that's better than punching your brother. Maybe for some people, you can do a little bit of like throwing back and forth, but only if they're not like super heightened. Otherwise, that could go badly. But anything that appeals to them, And what I suggest in the book is when they're not in a crisis, when they're perfectly okay, when you're on the green field at the bottom of the mountain, that's when you want to talk about this stuff. You kind of want to go with your kids or whoever, your grown-up friends, and say, sometimes things get really hard. What do you think will be helpful when those times come? And then you figure it out together. You can have some fun practicing because when you're ripping up paper and nobody's actually feeling frustrated, it's kind of just funny and it's fun. Some kids like to draw or color. Some kids really like to put on their headphones and listen to some music. Some kids like to go outside. Putting your hands in dirt is really a grounding thing too. So you kind of work with your own child, figure out what strategies work. But the most important thing here is figuring this out when they're okay, when they're not having a tantrum or a meltdown. Then you can gather, especially for younger kids, gather a little basket, put the stuff in there that you've decided on together. And then when you see the big feeling coming, you kind of direct them towards the basket. You just hand them the paper. You don't say any words and let them rip. And Brian, you'd be shocked at how effective it is because it's just bringing awareness to that child. And like, if you hand them the paper, they know what to do because you've practiced it when they're feeling good. It's amazing. It works really quickly.
I always used to do the timeout thing, but problem with the timeout is you weren't doing anything. That sounds so much more successful than the timeout.
Yeah, so the timeout would be, what we would consider that punitive almost, right? Like it's a punishment. So if we think about a kid who's having a hard time with something that we don't really understand yet, and then we punish them for it, it kind of sends a message that whatever they're feeling is not super important to us. We just want them to stop the behavior. And that's
Siobhan,
kind
this
of
has
rough.
been really interesting. Remind us the name of the book and where we can get it, please.
It's Climbing Crisis Mountain, and it's available anywhere you buy books online, and it will be inside some Indigo stores in Toronto and the GTA.
Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Brian. This has been fun.
We're going to take a break and come back with another story in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody.